And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas, gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's July the 23rd, 204th day of the year. Just not very many days left that this year's over with. It's National Refreshment Day, celebrated on the fourth Thursday in July. They'd kick back with a nice cold beverage. National Vanilla Ice Cream Day, annual celebration dedicated to America's favorite ice cream flavor. And it's Sogren's Day, global observance, raising awareness about autoimmune disease. In 1952, the Egyptian monarchy was overthrown when the Society of Free Officers, led by Gamal Abdel Nasser, seized control of the government, forcing King Farouk to abdicate. And in 1999, Space Shuttle Columbia launched on the STS-93, making Eileen Collins the first female space shuttle commander. Well, on that note, let us see what stories we have in the news because, as the old saying goes, may you live in interesting times, and these are certainly interesting times, no question about that. Well, voters want major change amid economic and political discontent. Several findings in the latest Fox News poll show voters are not happy and want major change, which bodes well for Democrats in November. And President Trump's job approval rating remains near a record low, where Democrats are motivated to vote. Republicans join Democrats and independents in rating the economy negatively, and 4 in 10 voters want dramatic revolutionary change. And more view the GOP as tied to elites than the Democratic Party. I mean, neither party is in that much favor. Voters say Democrats can better handle income inequality, health care, inflation, the economy, and foreign policy. Republicans hold the advantage on crime, and while the government spending, Democrats in national security and more evenly divided. On immigration, GOP had a 8-point edge in April. Now Democrats are preferred by 1 point. More Democrats say they're extremely motivated to vote in November than Republicans by an 11-point margin. And by a 25-point spread, more MAGA Republicans are extremely motivated than non-MAGA Republicans. We'll see what comes of this upcoming election. Well, President Trump, Iran, and Napoleon's still relevant maxim. Future of the West and President Trump's reputation within through the centuries will depend on the outcome of the ongoing battle with the Islamic Republic of Iran. America's decisively winning that battle, but it's not yet won it. In fact, the U.S. could actually lose the battle. If President Trump perseveres, that won't happen, but if he abandons the battle, it could very well be the worst foreign policy debacle for the U.S. since the end of the Vietnam War, rivaling even that catastrophe of President Biden's command to American forces to quickly depart Afghanistan in 2021. And they left so quickly, they left behind an army's worth of equipment. Because of those two competing futures, it's highly likely that President Trump will persevere. And frankly, he should. Iran's run by religious fanatics. That's the overreaching reality about the defining threat Iran poses to the region and indeed to the world. The Islamic Republic of Iran and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that repressive regime can't be deterred. Tyrannies can be deterred. Xi Jinping can be deterred. Vladimir Putin can be deterred. Both have no evident desire to die or for history to end. Iran can't be deterred from its mission to destroy Israel and the United States because destruction, even defeat in this battle, is not what ultimately matters to most of the theocrats at the top of the Islamic Republic. Martyrdom is itself the best result for an individual caught up in Khomeiniism. Regime's survival is a secondary goal to its leadership's personal worldview. An extreme version of a minority branch of Islam, often called Twelver theology. And there's no question we're dealing with true fanatics in every sense of the word. Well, an Arkansas police officer tragically dies, saving a fiance's life just hours after he proposed to her. Arkansas police officer drowned after entering a river to save his fiancee just hours after proposing to her, according to her mother. Fred Marsh, 24, of the Rogers Police Department, entered Missouri's Elk River on Saturday to help another swimmer. Did not resurface, according to the Missouri State Highway Patrol. His fiance's mother identified the swimmer as her daughter. Marsh was recovered and pronounced dead Sunday after asking his fiancée, Haley, to marry him Saturday morning. They had been together for 3 beautiful years, and they'd had a very beautiful, loving relationship, Sherry Padgett told KHBS. Even though legally he wasn't my son-in-law, he'll forever be my son. And the pair had been together for 3 years, were out canoeing with another couple on the river near Lowell, Missouri, when Haley entered the water, began struggling against the current while trying to return to the boat. Marsh and fellow Rogers police officer was with him, then jumped into the water to help her out, Padgett said. They were able to move her to safety, but Marsh became distressed and exhausted, went under, and never resurfaced, according to the Missouri State Highway Patrol. He saw the love of his life in distress, and he was going to help his friend and do what a good human would do, Padgett said. Gave his life helping somebody else. Padgett said Marsh was loving and hardworking and guided by his Christian faith, emphasizing he never hesitated when somebody needed help. There's nothing he wouldn't do for somebody, Padgett said. You didn't have to tell him, you didn't have to beg him. He was just willing and would jump in there and do whatever it took to help somebody. Well, unfortunately, he did die. Well, Burger King makes a major change after thousands of customers sounded off. Visitors to Burger King may soon notice several changes inspired by updates that customers of the fast food chain said that they wanted. Earlier this year, we opened our phone lines and invited people to share their honest feedback, and they did, according to Burger King representative in a conversation with Fox News. One of the biggest takeaways was the guests wanted to feel welcomed when they walk in, know their order we made the way they ask, and have confidence if something isn't right, we'll make it right. Burger King said the initiative generated thousands of customer phone calls and text messages. 4 months later, the company is introducing 2 strategies aimed at improving customer service and order accuracy. The Your Way Champion is a reimagined restaurant manager role and is designed to empower restaurant leaders and put the guest experience first, Burger King announced in a news address. The champion will wear a dedicated uniform and serve as a point person for customers, overseeing order customization and satisfaction. The Whopper Guarantee promises if a Whopper, Burger King's signature hamburger, doesn't meet a customer's expectations, brand will not only continue to remake it on the spot, they'll offer the guest the next Whopper free of charge. This is about bringing habits your way to life in every restaurant every day, Burger King told Fox News. And I remember, far back as I frankly can, Burger King was known for the have it your way attitude. Well, AOC was roasted over a defense bill claim as a GOP lawmaker tells her to stop stoking Jewish hatred. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York, came under fire, claiming the House-passed National Defense Authorization Act would merge parts of our military with the Israeli Defense Force, drawing accusations that she distorted what the legislation actually does. The fight centers on Section 219 of the House-passed National Defense Authorization Act, That the provision calls for deeper U.S.-Israel defense integration through expanded cooperation on military technology, supply chains, research, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and joint exercises. On Wednesday, the House passed its version of the FY 2027 National Defense Authorization Act in a 2019 to 206 vote, leaving Section 219 intact. But ahead of that vote, Ocasio-Cortez wrote on X that the NDAA includes a provision to merge parts of our military with the IDF. That amendment is an existential threat to American sovereignty and democracy. Every member of Congress ought to vote no. Well, the bartender has spoke again. The mere fact she's wrong is irrelevant. Well, a bear was caught on camera perched atop the Mexico utility pole before reportedly suffering a fatal electrocution. Bear had climbed on top of a utility pole in rural New Mexico. Became the subject of a viral video this week after reportedly later dying after the unusual encounter. That video, recorded Monday near Gladstone, New Mexico, roughly 170 miles east of Santa Fe, shows the bear precariously perched on the crossarm of the utility pole while panting and trying to maintain its balance high above the ground. U.S. Department of Interior shared the video Wednesday, joking, "We appreciate the enthusiasm for American energy dominance, but this is not what we meant." Department of the Interior and New Mexico Department of Wildlife didn't immediately respond to Fox News' request for comment. Yet footage verified by Storyful also includes audio from a 911 caller reporting an unusual sight. Caller told the dispatcher, "I'm calling to report a bear on top of a light pole." Dispatch responded, state officials had already been notified, but said tranquilizing the animal that remained on top of the pole could have caused it to fall. Shannon Mullins, who recorded that video, told Storyful she was traveling from Red River, New Mexico to Oklahoma on Highway 56 when she and her family spotted what they initially thought was a dead bear. Really didn't believe what we saw at first, so we turned around to get another look. And it was a real bear perched on top of the light pole. The bear was electrocuted and died before wildlife officials could rescue it, according to the New York Post. Well, far-left squad Democrats mix up Jewish colleagues in a botched attack, didn't get burned by their own votes. Social media attack by two far-left House Democrats on moderate Representative Josh Gottheimer, a Democrat of New Jersey, backfired after one confused him with another Jewish Democrat named Josh, and the New Jersey centrists used their votes for Ukraine and aid to turn the exchange back on them. Clash erupted after Gottheimer criticized the growing influence of Democratic socialists inside the Democratic Party. The DSA are not Democrats, they're socialists. They want to hijack the Democratic Party, he wrote in an X post on Monday. Democrats have a big tent. That's our strength. We embrace a range of ideas, but there's no room for anti-American bomb throwers who oppose our ideas, our values, and our leaders. Next day, Representative Summer Lee, Democrat of Pennsylvania, fired back by accusing him of being among the Democrats who signed bombs and voted to drop them, apparently confusing Gottheimer and Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. Shapiro, not Gottheimer, signed an artillery shell bound for Ukraine during President Zelensky's 2024 visit to Pennsylvania. That's according to a Fox News report in September 2024. You know, that's the other Jewish guy named Josh, right? Gottheimer said in response to Lee. Squad Representative Ilhan Omar, Democrat of Minnesota, then jumped in to defend Lee, writing that Shapiro had signed the bombs you voted to be dropped. Well, neither Omar nor Lee identified a specific vote, but Gottheimer turned the accusation back on both lawmakers by pointing out they'd voted for a $60.8 billion Ukraine aid package before Shapiro signed the Ukraine-bound artillery shell. Well, the Democratic Socialists of America are not a good thing. Hassan Piker tells Mondami to shut the F up over cautious messaging. Claims the mayor needs to be more bold. Far-left streamer Hassan Piker told New York Mayor Zoran Mondani, "Shut the F up," and urged progressives to present their policies more boldly during an interview released Wednesday on Ziteo's We're Not Kidding podcast in Washington, D.C. According to what Piker said, I just listened to his New York Times conversation where the New York Times asked him, if you had unlimited money, what would you do? Piker said, Mondami replied, exactly the same policies I'm implementing. I'm like, shut the F up, dude. Piker's criticism came during a broader discussion with Zoteo founder Mehdi Hassan about whether left-wing politicians are too concerned with optics and too willing to retreat when their positions draw criticism. Piker told politicians like Representative Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York, risk appearing uncommitted in their positions when they sound hesitant or defensive. If you come across as even a little worried, even a little defensive, and people respond with that, oh, maybe she doesn't believe that either. Well, we got a lot of strange people elected to office. No question about that. Well, Florida's stock is rising. How it became the world's 14th largest economy as the blue states continue a death spiral. The state's GDP grew by 6.3% over the last year. Now trails South Korea in its push toward the top 10. Pulling in capital and talent and corporations at a historic clip, Florida's no longer just competing with rival states. It's competing with global economies. New data from the Florida Chamber of Commerce shows the Sunshine State's $1.8 trillion economy has climbed to number 14 globally, according to the Florida Chamber Foundation. Chamber says the ranking demonstrates the state's emphasis on lower taxes and streamlined regulations of free enterprises should be emphasized. Best way to help America move forward is to have Florida lead the country forward when it comes to free enterprise and freedom, according to Florida Chamber of Commerce President and CEO Mark Wilson. Would follow Florida's lead, everybody wins. Well, Texas is also competing with Florida. Well, a beloved gas station chain reveals managers can earn up to $275,000 without having a college degree. Buc-ee's is fueling debate online after a sign displaying employee pay rates revealed that some store managers can earn as much as $275,000 a year without having a college degree. That pay scale, which is circulated wildly on social media, lists cashiers and warehouse workers and maintenance employees and grocery stockers starting at $20 an hour. Food service managers can earn between $150,000 and $200,000 annually, while general managers can make between $200,000 and $275,000. These listed salaries and benefits sparked discussion on X, with some users calling them proof that six-figure careers don't always require a college degree. Others argue the salaries reflect the pressure and responsibility that comes with managing one of the chain's massive stores. Well, based on the education I've seen from some recent college graduates, college degree doesn't mean today what it used to mean. Now, listen to one college graduate holding forth on his view of the world. And if what he was saying was actually what he actually meant, he's one of the dumbest people I ever heard draw breath. Well, Nolan Wells' hometown officials rallied behind the sheriff after derelict in their duties attack. Officials from Nolan Wells' hometown are rallying behind their sheriff after being accused of being derelict in their duties on Wednesday morning. NAACP President Derek Johnson accused Mississippi officials of failing to properly handle the case during the same news conference where the attorney Ben Crump announced the independent autopsy results. Not accusing anybody of anything other than the state of Mississippi and local officials, accusing them of being derelict in their duties, according to Johnson. Follow-up ensured that regardless of what happened, there's proper investigation so that this family and that community can be assured if anybody was involved, they'd be held accountable. Wells, who was 18, disappeared July 4th after he went with friends on a boat trip to Horn Island, which is a barrier island off Mississippi's Gulf Coast. Officials and search crews searched for 2 days before a National Park Service ranger located his remains July 6th while on the island's northwestern tip. Mississippi State Senator Jeremy England, who represents a portion of Jackson County where the incident took place, told Fox News the accusation by Johnson was completely unfair. Said our sheriff and our district attorney here in Jackson County, our DPS commissioner over the state of Mississippi, law enforcement, and our crime lab, the officers they put together. I don't know many of them personally and professionally, and they have the utmost integrity, and they want to get the facts correct and get out there. You know, they understand they're under a microscope at this point in time, but they're being unfairly attacked. And for no other reason than people trying to make shocking claims and get people to think something nefarious happened and was going on. Well, quite often it's very difficult to put together what happened in the case of a mysterious death. Well, Cole Hauser admits Sheridan's absence from the writer's room created challenges on Dutton Ranch. He's giving fans a glimpse behind the scenes of Dutton Ranch, and it wasn't all smooth sailing. And that actor who reprises his fan favorite role as Rip Wheeler in the Yellowstone spinoff acknowledged the cast faced an uphill battle after franchise creator Taylor Sheridan stepped away from the show's writer room during the spinoff's first season. He told Film Inside New York City there were challenges, you know. Not having Taylor Sheridan there for us to really kind of be able to work with these new writers, these new directors, and these people. Everything changed. The only normality that we had, whatever, was Carter, played by Finn Little, Christina, director Alexandria Voros, and Kelly and myself. Dutton Ranch, it's wrapped its first season early this month and marked the first series in the Yellowstone universe not to be written by Sheridan. And quite frankly, having some experience in writing TV series, it can be a handful. Well, Missouri suspect dives headfirst off the bridge in a wild bid to evade deputies. 26-year-old Missouri man's dramatic attempt to outrun police by diving headfirst off a bridge was caught on video. That video was actually released by the Stone County Sheriff's Office, shows Gavin Thor Lundgren of Kimberling City sprinting across a 2-lane bridge before launching himself headfirst into the waters of Table Rock Lake. The leading deputies on the chase during the morning hours of July 18th. This was definitely a first and luckily survived the fall, according to the Sheriff's Office. He resisted arrest and deputies suffered minor injuries, taking him into custody. London was arrested and charged with 3 counts of third-degree assault on a special victim, resisting arrest for a felony, resisting arrest by fleeing and careless driving. According to probable cause statement, deputies tried to stop him around 1:50 in the morning after spotting his 2004 Chevrolet Malibu traveling nearly 75 miles an hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. Instead of pulling over, led deputies on a pursuit before abandoning a still-moving car and diving off the bridge into Table Rock Lake. Well, unfortunately for him, he got caught. Well, we've been talking about a lot of off-the-wall stories. You know, governments live and breathe secrets. And quite often, they don't tell the people they govern the truth. And there's also strange programs the government's undertaken for various reasons. We've talked about a number of those. This next story comes out of England. We're talking about the Cambridge Five. The story began May 25th, 1951. 2 Englishmen left Britain and walked into one of the most damaging spy scandals of the 20th century. We're talking about Donald MacLean and Guy Burgess. Now, to onlookers, they looked like men who belonged to the world of British power. MacLean was a polished foreign office diplomat, born into privilege, educated at Cambridge, smooth enough to move among ambassadors and ministers. Burgess was somewhat louder, messier, and more reckless, but he also had the unmistakable signals of the British ruling class. He'd gone to the right university, had the right friends, the right accent, the right confidence. Well, on that particular night, they weren't simply leaving the country. They were escaping exposure. MacLean had long been under suspicion as a Soviet spy. American code breakers and British investigators had been closing in on a mole known by the code name of Homer, highly placed source who'd leaked diplomatic and atomic secrets to Moscow. The trials were beginning to point toward MacLean. and he was expected to be facing a round of interrogation. And then Burgess appeared on the radar, and the two men vanished. On actuality, they traveled to the south coast, crossed to France, and vanished behind the Iron Curtain. For years, Britain didn't know exactly where they'd gone. Evidently, eventually, the truth became undeniable. They'd defected to the Soviet Union. Well, if that wasn't bad enough, there was a real shock still waiting. McLean and Burgess had not been alone. They were part of a spy ring recruited at Cambridge University in the 1930s. Part of a circle of young British men who rose into the highest rooms of government and intelligence and diplomacy and wartime secrecy while secretly serving Moscow. And their names became infamous. Kim Philby, Guy Burgess, Donald McLean, Anthony Blunt, John Cairncross. Together, they'd be known as the infamous Cambridge Five. Now, that name sounds almost academic, almost neat, as if they were a debating society, a group of bright young men from a vanished university age. But that would be misleading. Cambridge Five weren't boys playing a revolution. They were deeply committed and deeply placed Soviet agents who passed secrets during some of the most dangerous years in modern history. The rise of fascism, the Second World War, the birth of the atomic age, the opening of the Cold War, and the formation of NATO. And their betrayal wasn't just the fact they released a single stolen document. It was a long, patient infiltration of the British establishment from the inside. Now, the complete story begins in Cambridge in the 1930s, when Europe felt as if it were coming apart. The Great Depression had shaken faith in capitalism. Fascism was rising in Germany and Italy and Spain. Young intellectuals saw liberal democracy as weak and exhausted. Communism, to some folks, looked like the only force willing to confront Hitler directly. The lecture halls and college rooms and smoky parties and political societies and private conversations. Idealistic students argued about class and empire and revolution and future civilization. And that was the atmosphere that Soviet intelligence entered. The men who become the Cambridge spies were not recruited from the margins. They were recruited from the very center of privilege. That was the genius of it. Soviet handlers understood something that Britain itself failed to see clearly. The British class system could be used as a camouflage. Men with the right background could pass through doors that would remain closed to almost everybody else. He'd be trusted before he had earned the trust. He could be forgiven behavior that would ruin a less protected man. He'd be promoted, invited, and vouched for and believed. The Soviets didn't want wild revolutionaries waving red flags in public. They wanted sleeper agents. They wanted men who could hide their communism and join the respectable world and enter the Foreign Office, intelligence services, wartime ministries, and world adjacent institutions, and quietly pass information back to Moscow. Well, the recruiter most often associated with the Cambridge Ring was a man named Arnold Deutsch, Austrian-born Soviet intelligence officer working for the NKVD. He understood psychology as much as he did espionage. He didn't merely ask these young men for documents, he offered them a role in history. He made betrayal feel like moral courage. He convinced them they weren't serving a foreign power, but the future. And that was the poison at the heart of the Cambridge Five. They didn't think of themselves as ordinary traders selling secrets for money. And most, of course, were not primarily motivated by cash. They believed, at least in the beginning, they were fighting fascism and capitalism, imperialism, and the decay of the old order. Their treason was wrapped in ideology. That made it, of course, more durable. A paid spy can stop when the money dries up. A believer can keep going for decades, money or not. Kim Philby had become the most notorious of them all. He had charm and nerve and a coldness that made him almost perfectly suited to espionage. Born Harold Adrian Russell Philby, son of the explorer and Arabist St. John Philby. He carried all world confidence with him just like a passport. At Cambridge, he moved through the left-wing circles and then carefully buried the evidence of his sympathies. Worked as a journalist, covered the Spanish Civil War, and eventually entered British intelligence. Once inside MI6, which is the British Foreign Service, MI5 is the their version of our FBI. But once inside MI6, Philby became a disaster disguised as an asset. During the Second World War and the early Cold War, he worked in sections dealing with anti-Soviet intelligence. They meant the Soviets had a man inside the British service responsible for watching them. It's like a burglar being hired to design the alarm system. Philby passed Moscow information about British operations, Allied intelligence, and anti-communist networks. And his betrayal is believed to have cost lives. Operations involving anti-Soviet agents sent to Eastern Europe were compromised. Men who believed they were being supported by the West walked into traps. Some were captured, some were killed. Philby later treated these losses with a chilling absence of remorse, as if ruined lives were merely the cost of a game he had played better than anybody else. One of the darkest episodes connected to Philby involved Konstantin Volkov, a Soviet intelligence officer in Istanbul who tried to defect in 1945. Volkov offered to reveal Soviet agents inside British intelligence and the Foreign Office. That information could have exposed the Cambridge 5 years earlier, but Philby learned about it. Instead of helping secure Volkov, he warned Moscow. Volkov vanished into Soviet hands, never seen again. That single episode shows the true nature of Philby's position. He wasn't just stealing files, he was protecting his spy ring from discovery, even when it meant sending a would-be defector to his death. Donald MacLean was quieter than Philby, but his access was extraordinary. He entered the British Foreign Office and served in sensitive diplomatic posts, including in Washington. During the war and after it, he passed Moscow the stream of high-level material. His information included British and American diplomatic thinking, wartime policy, material connected to atomic cooperation. MacLean's value to the Soviets was immense because he stood close to the machinery of Anglo-American power at the exact moment the atomic world was being born. He wasn't the only Soviet source on nuclear matters, though, but he helped Moscow understand Western policy tensions and intentions. While officials in London and Washington spoke behind closed doors, he was quietly opening those doors for Stalin. And the damage wasn't simply technical, not by a long shot. It was strategic. The Soviet Union could read the fears and divisions and calculations of its rivals more clearly because men like MacLean were feeding it the paper bloodstream of Western democracy and diplomacy. Guy Burgess was the strangest of the group, and in some ways he was the most reckless. He was brilliant, he's witty, drunk, chaotic, rude, and often self-destructive. Seemed like the kind of man no serious intelligence service would trust. But that was part of his cover. In elite British society, outrageous behavior could be dismissed as eccentricity, especially if the offender had the right accent and the right connections. Burgess moved through the BBC, MI6, the Foreign Office, and circles of influence with astonishing freedom. He knew politicians and journalists and diplomats and spies and aristocrats. He collected gossip and secrets where other men collected invitations. He was sloppy in daily life, but useful in espionage because he was plugged into the nerves of the establishment. Also closely tied to MacLean's escape, Philby, then serving in Washington as a British intelligence liaison, realized investigators were closing in on MacLean. Burgess was sent back to Britain and helped warn him. Two men fled together in 1951. Burgess wasn't supposed to defect with MacLean. His disappearance made the scandal far worse and immediately raised suspicions around Philby. But Burgess went anyway, either out of panic, morality, recklessness, or maybe all three. The result was catastrophic for British intelligence. If MacLean had disappeared alone, the damage might have been contained. Burgess's flight made it obvious that a wider network did exist. It also placed Philby under a shadow he could never fully escape. And yet, Philby survived. That's one of the most shocking parts of the Cambridge 5 story. After Burgess and MacLean defected, Philby became the suspected third man. He resigned from MI6, but he wasn't publicly exposed. In 1955, after years of suspicion, the British government effectively cleared him in public. He even held a press conference and denied being a Soviet agent. He stood in front of reporters, composed and firmly offended, and lied. Something government officials do very well. The British establishment wanted to believe him because the alternative was unbearable. If Philby was guilty, then Soviet intelligence had penetrated MI6 at a terrifying level. It meant Britain had been humiliated not by an outsider, but by one of its own polished sons. It meant the old network of trust, the school tie, the club, the accent, the personal recommendation, had failed completely. So Philby was given space. Eventually, British intelligence used him again in Beirut, where he worked as a journalist and formal intelligence contact. A stunning act of institutional denial. The man suspected of betraying British operations to Moscow was allowed back into the world as secrets still moved around him. In 1963, as the evidence became impossible to manage, Philby defected to the Soviet Union. He boarded a Soviet freighter in Beirut and vanished. In Moscow, he was welcomed as a hero, though his later life was lonelier and more disappointing than the spy fantasy might suggest. He drank heavily, gave lectures, lived as a trophy of Soviet intelligence, used as a symbol that never fully trusted as a Russian. He betrayed Britain, but he could never become wholly Soviet either. And that's the fate of a lot of traitors. They destroy one home and never fully accepted by the next. Well, Anthony Blunt was different from Philby in temperament, but equally unsettling in what he represented. He was elegant, intellectual, cultivated, and an art historian of great reputation. During the war, he served in MI5, later became a surveyor of the King's Pictures, then surveyor of the Queen's Pictures, moving closer to the royal household and the highest cultural circles in Britain. Well, his espionage began at Cambridge and continued through wartime intelligence work. Passed information to Soviet handlers and helped protect others in the network. His role wasn't only operational, but actually social. He knew people. He understood networks. He could identify promising recruits and protect relationships. 1964, Blunt confessed privately to British authorities after being offered immunity from prosecution. And for a number of years, the public had no idea. He continued his scholarly life, kept his position, remained a respected figure in British art history. Then in 1979, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, publicly named him in Parliament. And that revelation was explosive. Britain learned a Soviet spy not only worked inside the MI5, but later occupied a prestigious position connected to the royal household. Well, Blunt was stripped of his knighthood. His reputation collapsed. It became a symbol of establishment concealment, not just espionage. The public anger wasn't only that Blunt had spied. Oh, no. It was that he had been protected by the very system he spied against. Many Britons, Blunt confirmed the suspicion, that one law for ordinary people and there was another for the well-connected. Working-class traitor would have been prosecuted, disgraced, and imprisoned. Blunt had confessed and continued living behind the curtains of privilege. That sense of double standard made his exposure especially poisonous. And then there was John Cairncross, long regarded as the fifth man, though for years the identity of that fifth man was debated. He was Scottish, brilliant, and less socially dazzling than Burgess or Philby. He moved through important government posts, including the Foreign Office, Treasury, and with wartime intelligence-related offices, had access to highly sensitive material, including wartime decrypts and policy documents. He passed valuable information to the Soviets during the Second World War. Among the most important material attributed to him were the documents that helped Moscow understand German military intentions and Allied intelligence. Some accounts have connected his intelligence to the Soviet victory at Kursk, one of the most decisive battles on the Eastern Front. The precise weight of his contribution is debated, but there's no serious doubt that he gave Moscow important secrets. Unlike Philby and Burgess and McLean, Cairncross didn't flee to Moscow. He was questioned, confessed in stages, and lived for decades under a cloud before being publicly identified more fully. His quieter profile made him seem less dramatic. That's somewhat misleading. The Cambridge ring didn't need every member to be flamboyant. It needed access, and Cairncross had it. The true genius of the Cambridge Five was their placement. Philby inside British intelligence, McLean inside diplomacy and atomic policy, Burgess inside information networks, intelligence circles, the Foreign Office. Blunt inside MI5 and the Royal Cultural Institutes. And Karen Cross inside government departments and wartime secret channels. They weren't standing outside the walls trying to climb in. They're already inside, eating at the table. What made the Cambridge Five especially disturbing is how long they lasted. Espionage usually depends on secrecy, but their survival also depended on disbelief. British officials missed warnings, ignored patterns, excused behavior, and trusted social signals over evidence. Burgess's chaos was dismissed as personality. Philby's charm was mistaken for loyalty. Blunt's refinement covered up treason. McLean's polished diplomacy concealed his ideological allegiance. And Karen Cross's brilliance opened doors. Again and again, the establishment saw what it expected to see. That failure wasn't just personal, it was cultural. British ruling class had trained itself to recognize one of us. Soviets exploited that instinct perfectly. They understood that a man from the right background didn't need to be invisible. He could hide in plain sight because people would explain away what they didn't want to believe. And the Cambridge Five also damaged the relationship between Britain and the U.S. American officials had shared secrets with British counterparts, believing they were dealing with trusted allies. When the scale of Soviet penetration became clear, trust weakened. The U.S. began to wonder whether British intelligence could protect anything at all. Damage wasn't only in the secrets already lost, but in the suspicion created afterwards. Every future conversation carried a shadow. Who else might be listening? Well, that question poisoned intelligence cooperation for years. The human cost of the Cambridge Five is harder to count than the documents. Files can be numbered. Careers can be traced. Defections can be dated. What about the agents betrayed behind the Iron Curtain? What about the anti-communist networks rolled after Moscow received warnings? What about defectors who disappeared, operations that failed, and people whose names were exposed because somebody in London quietly passed them across? But the Cambridge spies often presented themselves as men of principle. But their principles did have victims. They claimed to oppose fascism, imperial cruelty, but they served Stalin's Soviet Union, a state of purges and prison camps and executions and forced famine and political terror. They claimed moral seriousness while providing secrets to one of the most repressive regimes of the 20th century. And that contradiction, of course, is enormous. None of them ever fully escaped it. Philby in particular never offered the kind of remorse his victims deserved. He remained committed to the cause, or at least to the story he built around himself. And that may have been necessary. A man who had betrayed friends and colleagues and agents and country for decades can't easily admit he was wrong. To admit that would be to face the wreckage, not as strategy, but as a sin. Where Burgess and McLean paid a different price. Their Soviet exile wasn't glamorous. Burgess struggled badly in Moscow, isolated by language and culture and his own appetites. McLean adapted somewhat better, working as a specialist on Western affairs. But he also lived as a man cut off from the country that had formed him. The Soviet Union had been their imagined future. In reality, it became a cage with privileges. Blunt's punishment was public disgrace. Karen Cross lived in ambiguity and denied before the truth settled around him. Philby became a legend, but legends can be lonely prisons. The Cambridge Five scandal endures because it's not only a spy story. It's a story about belief and class and arrogance and blindness. Ask how intelligence men convinced themselves betrayal was virtue. Ask how a state trusted the wrong people because they looked and sounded familiar. Ask how ideology can turn bright young minds into servants of a foreign tyranny. And also ask why institutions often protect themselves before they protect the truth. The story is also about a strange theatrical quality. Candlelit Cambridge rooms and secret meetings in London and diplomatic cables in Washington. Coded names in Soviet files, defectors vanishing into Moscow. Ministers lying to Parliament without knowing the full truth, and one polished traitor after another stepping out behind the curtain. But the theatrical surface shouldn't soften what happened. The Cambridge Five gave the Soviet Union a window into British and Allied power at crucial moments in history. They compromised intelligence operations. They damaged diplomatic trust. They embarrassed Britain before the world. Showed Moscow the old empire could be entered not through its gates, but through its sons. That's why they belong in the hidden files of the world. Not because they were the only spies in the Cold War, but because they were the nightmare version of espionage. Enemy didn't have to break in. He was invited in, educated, promoted, trusted, knighted, cleared, protected, and seated in rooms where history is being made. Cambridge 5 weren't shadows at the edge of power. They were power's reflection, smiling back while passing its secrets to Moscow. For years, British and Britain itself looked straight at these 5 traitors and refused to see the truth. All they could see was the background. Well, sometimes the most dangerous secrets in America didn't first appear as confessions in courtroom exhibits or dramatic arrest. They appeared as numbers. We're going to talk about the Venona project. Long columns of 5-digit groups sat on a paper like meaningless other reports from a dead machine. Anybody outside the narrow world of wartime cryptoanalysts, they were nothing. Gray pages, Soviet cables, encrypted traffic collected from embassy and consular communications. But inside Arlington Hall, the U.S. Army's secret code-breaking center in Virginia, a small group of linguists and mathematicians and clerks and analysts stared at those numbers for years. Convinced that somewhere beneath them was a hidden map of Soviet espionage. Project eventually got the code name Venona. It all began on February 1st, 1943, when the U.S. Army Signal Intelligence Services started examining Soviet encrypted communications. First, the target was diplomatic traffic. And slowly and painfully, that traffic revealed something far more explosive. Messages about espionage and agents and secret meetings and cover names and atomic research and Soviet penetration of the American government. NSA later stated that Venona gave U.S. leadership insight into Soviet intentions and treasonous activities of government employees, until that program was eventually canceled in 1980. And the irony, of course, was brutal. During World War II, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were allies against Nazi Germany. American factories supplied war material to the Soviets. Roosevelt and Stalin sat at the same side of the global struggle against Hitler. And even while the alliance wasn't alive, Soviet intelligence officials in the U.S. were communicating with Moscow about sources inside the American government, scientific institutions, military programs, and the atomic bomb project. Friendship at the top didn't stop espionage underneath. Soviet systems should have been unbreakable. Their message uses a code system and added a separate layer of encryption from a one-time pad, a method that, if used correctly, is mathematically secure. One-time pad encryption depends on one absolute rule: never reuse the same key material. If the key is truly random, kept secret, and used only once, the message can't be solved by ordinary cryptoanalysis. It became a locked door without a pattern. But the war created pressure. Soviet communications expanded dramatically. And somewhere in that machinery of Moscow's cryptographic production, key material was repeated, reused. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. That mistake opened a hairline crack in the wall. For the Americans, that crack is still almost impossibly small. The codes weren't written in plain Russian beneath the encryption. They were coded, enciphered, fragmented, and full of cover names. And even when a portion of a message was recovered, it might contain blanks, uncertain words, missing groups, or names hidden behind aliases. Venona wasn't like opening a file cabinet and reading a spy list, like finding burned scraps from a library and trying to reconstruct the shelves, the authors, the missing pages, and the people who had stolen the books. In 1946, a gifted linguist named Meredith Knox Gardner began to make the first real breakthroughs into KGB traffic. She taught German before joining the Army Signal Intelligence Service, learned Japanese with astonishing speed during the war, and moved on to Russian. The NSA later credited him with helping reconstruct Soviet code books and identify spell indicators that allowed English names and phrases to emerge from the cipher system. The first readable fragments came about very slowly. In July On July 31st, 1946, Gardner extracted a phrase from a KGB message sent from New York to Moscow in 1944. December 13th, he read a message discussing the 1944 U.S. presidential campaign. And on December 20th, 1946, he broke into a message that contained names of leading scientists working on the Manhattan Project. And that was the moment Venona stopped being a technical curiosity, became a national security earthquake. Americans learned that Soviet intelligence has reached into the atomic bomb project, not suspected, not imagined, reached. The men and women at Arlington Hall didn't shout the discovery into history. They couldn't. The work was too secret. The source was too delicate. Moscow learned how much had been recovered. Soviet intelligence might alter procedures, destroy evidence, or hide surviving agents more carefully. So the revelation stayed trapped inside a narrow compartment of American secrecy, shared only with a small circle of military intelligence officials, FBI counterintelligence officers, and eventually trusted British partners. Well, the code breakers had found a hidden war, but they couldn't publicly admit the weapon they revealed it. That secrecy shaped everything that followed. In 1945, before Venona had fully matured, several defectors and witnesses had already begun telling American authorities that Soviet espionage networks existed inside the U.S. Whittaker Chambers, a former communist courier, gave information about underground activity from the 1930s. Elizabeth Bentley, a former Soviet courier and agent handler, came to the FBI and named government employees she said had passed information to Moscow. Igor Guzinko, a Soviet GRU code clerk in Ottawa, defected and exposed to Soviet espionage in Canada. Venona didn't create the suspicion of Soviet spying. It helped confirm, deepen, and map it. NSA's Venona history states that the Venona messages verified much of what Bentley disclosed. And that's one of the most important details in the entire story. Venona wasn't a standalone circle. It was part of a web of evidence, defectors and witnesses and surveillance and interrogations and document trails and captured clues and decoded cables. In some cases, Venona identified people investigators already suspected. In others, it pointed toward names that nobody had yet understood. Sometimes it confirmed, sometimes it suggested, sometimes it raised questions that couldn't be answered, and sometimes it actually lit the fuse. In 1948, FBI Supervisor Robert Lamphere became the Bureau's key liaison to Meredith Gardner and the Venona team. Lamphere later remembered first seeing the fragmentary KG messages and becoming electrified by what they seemed to contain. He said later he got excited about it and went to meet Gardner, and the two men formed one of the most important counterintelligence partnerships of the early Cold War. Gardner had the numbers and Lamphere had the files. That combination changed investigation. Gardner could show that a Soviet cover name appeared in the cable. Lamphere could search FBI records for a person whose job, location, family, travel, or associates matched the clues. And then Lamphere could bring names and plain text and background information or surveillance leads back to Gardner, helping him refine future decryptions. It was an effective loop. Code-breaking fed investigation, investigation fed code-breaking. At one point, Gardner asked Lamphere whether the FBI could obtain plain text versions of Soviet commercial messages that might match encrypted traffic. Lamphere sent a request to the New York office and received a stack of Russian messages several inches high. When he took them to Gardner, the cryptoanalyst was more excited than Lamphere had ever seen him. That stack helped Arlington Hall make major progress. Now, this wasn't glamorous espionage. It was proper. It was paper. It was patience. It was language. It was fragments and obsession. Venona's first practical use inside the FBI had to be disguised. In 1948, Lamphere sent information derived from Venona into Bureau channels, but the intelligence was attributed to a vague, highly sensitive source rather than coded Soviet cables. The FBI used this kind of subterfuge because very few agents were cleared into the program, and even officials receiving the intelligence often didn't know where it truly came from. And that secrecy protected the Venona, but it created a dangerous problem. The government sometimes had powerful evidence that couldn't openly use in court. Prosecutors couldn't simply state in front of a jury and say, "We know this because we broke Soviet intelligence traffic." To do so would expose one of the most valuable counterintelligence secrets in the world. So investigators had to build cases through confessions and witnesses and surveillance and documents and other evidence. Venona could point toward the door, but they often needed something else to unlock it in public. And the atomic spy investigations show how that worked. One Venona thread helped point investigators toward Klaus Fuchs, the German-born physicist who worked on the British mission to the Manhattan Project. Fuchs had passed atomic information to the Soviets. Lanfear later explained that one message indicated somebody on the British mission had supplied information about uranium work. Investigators narrowed it down to Fuchs. MI5 interrogated him, and he confessed. And his confession led to Hilary Gold, a courier. Gold's confession led to David Greenglass, a machinist at Los Alamos. Greenglass then identified his own brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg, as the man who recruited him. Lanfear later described what happened after Fuchs and Goldberg breakthroughs. Would have been a quiet investigation turned into a raging monster, he said. Information poured in from across the country. FBI suddenly had cases breaking everywhere. The Rosenberg case became the most famous and controversial Venona-linked prosecution. Venona identified Julius Rosenberg under the cover name of Antenna and later Liberal. Messages showed that he was part of a Soviet espionage network and had been extra to wartime atomic spying. His wife, Ethel Rosenberg, appeared in the Venona material as well, but one message noted that Liberal's wife was named Ethel wherever her husband's worked. NSA's public Venona history describes the files as famous for exposing Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, though historians still debate the exact degree of Ethel's operational role compared to Julius. And that distinction does matter. Julius Rosenberg was deeply involved in Soviet espionage. Venona and later evidence make it difficult to deny. Ethel's case is more morally and legally complicated. Venona supports she knew about and supported aspects of the espionage network, but didn't show her as the equal technical spy that Julius was. Even Lanfear later said the FBI recommended the death penalty for Julius, but a 30-year sentence for Ethel because the evidence against him was weaker and because she was the mother of two small children. Well, the judge went ahead and sentenced both to death anyway. On the night of the executions in 1953, Lanfear said he sat waiting, hoping they'd finally talk. He said, "I wanted them to talk. He believed more people were part of the ring and that cooperation could have broken the network wide open." They didn't talk, though. They died in the electric chair at Sing Sing, and their death became one of the most contested symbols of the Cold War. Venona didn't end the argument over the Rosenbergs, but it did transform it. For declassification, supporters could argue the entire case was a frame-up or anti-communist hysteria. After Venona, Julius's guilt was no longer seriously defensible. The argument shifted toward Ethel's degree of guilt, and the fairness of the trial and the use of pressure against her to make Julius confess and the executions were justified. That's one of Venona's great historical effects. It didn't always make the past simpler. It sometimes made the past harder. Venona also touched the case of Alger Hiss, Polish former State Department official accused by Whittaker Chambers of espionage. Hiss was convicted in 1950 not of espionage, but because the statute of limitations had expired, but of perjury. The FBI later described the Pumpkin Papers and the Chambers' documentary evidence as central to proving Hiss had lied. Venona included a secret Soviet code name, ALES, A-L-E-S, whom the FBI and many historians have identified as Hiss, though some dispute has persisted about that identification. But the Hiss case does show us the difficulty of cover names. Sometimes a cover name can be identified with near certainty. Julius Rosenberg's case was threatened by clues about his wife, his network, his corroborating evidence. Theodore Hall, an atomic spy at Los Alamos, appeared under the cover name MLAD, meaning youngster, a clue that fit his youth. He was only 19 when he began spying. In other cases, a cover name left room for argument. Venona was powerful, but it wasn't always complete. A lot of messages were fragmentary. Some names remained unknown, and some identifications depended on surrounding evidence. And that was why Venona had to be handled carefully. And on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk about more government secrets. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.